last year. So I want to welcome you to the second in our series of Adults Connect presentations. Amy was here last week talking about the impact of trauma on children, on people, and today I'll let Amy talk about what she's going to be covering today. But thanks for coming, and we hope to see you at the future ones. Good morning.
Good morning.
A lot of what I'm going to talk about today is going to be based in a continuation of what we talked about last week, because being a parent is hard enough. If you have your own struggles, it's going to be even harder when your kids start acting up as they will, because it's age appropriate. And then you're going to be struggling with two things: your own response, and have I harmed my child, or is my child out of control? What am I supposed to do? I recognize, number one, I'm not a parent except for a dog. And so everything I'm telling you is not from my experience as a parent, but from my experience as a therapist. And I'm very, very aware that parents are under a microscope when it comes to their kids. And if anything goes wrong with the kids, they usually blame the parent, whether the parent is guilty or not. So with that understanding, none of this is meant as a criticism, it's meant as tools. As you well know, every child is different. What works for one kid doesn't work for another. So take what helps you and discard what doesn't, okay? So, when your child, we're talking about children who have experienced some kind of trauma, whether it's a death of a friend through suicide or some other means, but there's other types of trauma. There's when parents have issues and are fighting or having struggles in front of the kids, or they hear it, that causes trauma in some kids. If the parents divorce, that's another type of trauma for kids. If you move, I don't think parents are aware that children take moving very hard, especially if they're already in school. I'm speaking from grown-ups who moved a lot when they were kids, and it was very hard on them because they kept losing their friends. So another point to make is that not every person who experienced trauma will develop PTSD or complex trauma, which is called CPTSD. You have a month for the body to work through it. Many, many times we work through the traumas we come up against. But there are some times when we don't, and that's after 30 days, if you're still struggling with symptoms, or if they're still struggling with symptoms, that means they're not handling the trauma that well. I recently had a young man, I don't usually take children under, adults under 18, but he had been in a serious car accident, and he had been in therapy for months. And he was still exhibiting these signs of trauma. He would have disassociation to the point where he was trembling and shaking, and they even videotaped it. I had never seen anything quite like it. So they begged me to take him, and I took him, and we did EMDR, which is my modality for treating trauma, and within 5 sessions, it stopped. In the beginning, he would do it when we would start doing some of the processing. He would disassociate, and he would start jerking. By the end of 5 sessions, he was gone. And I did one more session just to make sure it wasn't a fluke, and I've never heard from him again, so I assume everything's good. But this is just to let you know that, first of all, not everything that happens that is traumatic will affect a child that traumatically. They don't get just PTSD because they were exposed to something. It has a lot to do with their temperament and a lot to do with other influences besides the event. And the second thing is, when a child has been traumatized, regular therapy will not touch trauma. This has been documented by trauma experts in the field. You need trauma therapy to deal with trauma. It's different from talk therapy, okay? So, open communication. This is the number one thing when you realize something's going on with my child, with my young adult or my kid. You want to encourage them to talk. So, we don't like feelings that are uncomfortable. And that's what the children or our young adult needs to talk about, what's going on. So, it's very important to let children or young adults talk about their feelings. And this is where they won't talk about theirs if you're not aware and talk about yours. Remember, they learn from you. You're their model. Gottman says that children's behavior is not, it's a symptom, it's not the action. We tend to see if a child starts screaming, we tell them, quiet down, shut up. There's a reason. They don't use language like we do. They use, because they don't have the language, they use their behavior tells us something. And according to Gottman, John Gottman, it's better to say, I see you're upset. Do you know what's going on? They may not be able to tell you, but it will help them not to be judged for their actions so much is that you recognize something else is going on and you're dealing with that. Children use different language than adults. And because of that, it's what I learned when I used to see kids when I worked for Key Point, a lot of kids. I took some classes and I got trained in play therapy, which is a type of therapy for young adults or for children. And because of that, I learned very quickly, when you're playing with a kid, even if it's just something like Uno Dare, they loved Uno Dare because if you get the Dare card, they have to dare you with on one of the Dare cards, something like sing a song or pat your head for a whole minute or something silly. But they would start talking because they saw you as playing with them on their level. And so they didn't have that. If you ask a kid straight out, what's going on? What are they going to say? Oh, well, my mom and dad have been fighting and I don't know what to do. They don't have the language for that. So learning to use play is a really big way to help your children. And for that, we have a little exercise this morning. I'd like you to get into groups of 3. I think that would work. You can face it. I want it to be people you don't know. You can't be with somebody you know. But you don't know that well. And leave one chair empty between you because we're going to need to use that. All right? As a way of communication. Now this is something I learned when I worked in Romania doing field work. We used stones because the children out there not only didn't speak our language, but as far as words are concerned, we didn't speak theirs. So I'm going to give you a bunch of stones in each of your groups. And then I want you one by one to tell a story with the stones. And I want the people who are watching to notice what stone they picked, where they put it, all those little details. And I think you'll find out soon enough.
Do we talk about it?
Yes.
Is that fictitious?
Yes, you explain as you move the stones around. So it could be any stone. I'll look them up later. Worry about your being in the house.
In this learning, the social learning, one of the things we're afraid of, dark. And also, in the social worker part. Yeah. Just do.
Would anyone like to talk about their experience watching a story play out with something physical rather than just hearing it? Does anyone like to share what they experienced? Did they experience anything?
I feel like it just made it more relaxed to speak while I was moving the stones around. It gave me a reason not to have to make eye contact the whole time.
Sure.
Maybe kids would like that too, because sometimes eye contact with adults can be intimidating. That's kind of what I thought.
Thank you. Yes?
I noticed that I had an urge the right stone. And I knew the right stone for the person, and I really had to pick that stone. You know, I didn't want to pick that stone. I had to pick that stone. It meant something. It
So
brought-
it's also enlightening you as to what these people mean in your life.
And I really picked up on some of the things.
Anyone else? I want to tell you that when I was in Romania, there was this young boy, and he was in an orphanage, and we had him do the stone thing, and it was just amazing. He had come from a family, his family, and when he picked the stone for his family, he was just telling us the story. He was speaking in Romanian, of course, we had a translator, but we just watched. And he picked a really big stone for his dad, put it down far on the left, picked a really small stone for his mom and for his siblings. And he had the dad right over here, and his siblings over here, and without him saying anything, we could see the role his dad played in that family. So this is the sort of thing, as I said, I played many different games with kids. I use feeling cards. They don't like that very much because they don't know their feelings, but the stones are an easy, non-threatening way to get them to talk. Dare, they get so excited with the game, they just start sharing, just on their own. So that's some of the ways you can help a child or a young adult speak about things that are uncomfortable talking about. Offer professional help if they are open to it. The most important part of that is if they are open to it. Again, when I worked for Key Point, I had to see children who did not want to be there. I'll never forget one young man, probably 15. He had had immense trauma. He still had a lot of the trauma symptoms. He didn't want to talk. And I remember one of his persons who was taking care of him, he was in the foster care system, said, "You've got to make him talk about his trauma." I said, "No, we don't do that. That's traumatizing for the kid." So when you offer professional help, my suggestion is talk about yourself first. "Oh, I can see this is hard for you. You know, it's hard for me too." And then after you've talked to them for a while, I don't mean one day, I mean for a number of days or a number of weeks, and you see they're still struggling, my suggestion would be, you know, when I don't know what to do, I get help. Would you like to get help? Let that be their decision. If you force a child into therapy, and I know there are exceptions to this, but if you force a child into therapy, therapy becomes a punishment. And then they'll never go again on their own. So that would be my suggestion. Reassurance. Kids need you to understand them. So, please don't say, everything's going to be okay, because you don't know that. And kids, I've never seen anyone who can spot BS faster than a kid. So be honest with them. I don't know what's going to happen, but we'll get through it together. That they can accept. If you promise everything's going to be okay, and then it's not okay, you're a liar. And they won't trust you. Be human. Let them know you struggle too. This is how they make it. This is how you normalize these things. I have young adults that think life is supposed to be smooth. And when they hit a roadblock, I mean, these are 18, 19-year-olds. When they hit a roadblock, they're devastated. They get paralyzed. They sometimes want to kill themselves because your girlfriend decided not to be your girlfriend anymore. So help them realize life is meant to be up and down. And the thing that's important is not how smooth life is, but that you have the courage and the strength, and you're not alone to get through it. If they know that, they won't expect life to be smooth, because that's unrealistic. Affirm their feelings, even their negative ones. We don't like negative feelings. I don't like negative feelings either. But that's where we have to become comfortable with our negative feelings, so that we can help them identify them and know that's not the worst thing in the world. Suppose you have a thermometer, and the thermometer only read 65 to 75, because that's the only temperatures I'm comfortable in. How would you know to prepare for a frost? if it never went below 65? How would you know not to plan this great outdoor banquet to that day because it's going to be 107 in the sun? You need all your feelings. Bad feelings are not bad. Anger, resentment, envy, those are human feelings that tell us something about ourselves. And the kids need to learn that. You can't learn to regulate your feelings if you don't even know what they are. Last week I spoke about Brene Brown having a new book out, talking about feelings called Atlas of the Heart. And she says that most people only know 4: happiness, sadness, anger, and fear. That's pretty sad because we have so many more feelings. And understanding your feelings, you can know what to do with them. Anger is a good feeling. It's a God-given feeling, really. It tells you something is happening that's not right. It's how you express that anger that's bad. And you can't teach your kids if you don't know yourself, right? We all struggle with this. So, and then focus on them. I'm saying this because my parents used to say to me, and I hated it, well, when I was your age, I had to be thus and so. Don't do that to your kids. It doesn't endear yourself to them. Get down on their level. What's bothering you? Remember, it's not going to be what you were bothered by. It's a different world. Their feelings are valid. Their feelings are real. Let them know that. You want your kid to come to you when they're struggling. You don't want them going to their friends, right? Their friends are not going to give them good advice. But they've got to feel safe coming to you. And you make it safe when you accept that, yes, you drive me crazy, but I'm the person here for you. What's going on? So, say your child has undergone some traumatic event that we spoke about earlier. All the studies say the thing you need to do is to continue their routine. It doesn't mean that if they want a day out of school because they just had something traumatic happen and they can't manage it. That doesn't mean don't give them that day off or time alone. But what it does mean is that don't let this become a habit. This is how we pick up unhealthy coping mechanisms. When we self-soothe, and it feels really good to be by myself in my room, and then I end up staying in my room day after day after day after day. That's unhealthy. So routine offers security for a child. It also offers something that they know. So the important parts of routine would be maintain a sleep schedule. Sleep is one of the most important things that affects your mood, whether you know it or not. It also affects the ability to think properly. It also affects your ability to function. And the best sleep is a sleep that's on a schedule. Sleeping all day and playing games all night is not a healthy sleep routine. And I know with kids this is really hard. I have a stepson. And getting him to be up during the day is really hard. So that's doing them a favor to try to help them maintain a routine. Also, watch out for the isolation. There are certain types that go to extremes of behavior, such as hanging out with the wrong kind of people and doing the wrong kind of things. But there's also the extreme of isolation. I'll just go in my room and I'll play video games, or I'll watch YouTube. Those things are not helping them learn how to cope with issues. So try to keep up the routine, whatever your routine is in your family and your household, try to keep that as much as possible. Education. You need to talk to the child in the way that they can understand. If you don't know what to say, research it. Get help. Children need to know you know something's not right. Even if they can't talk about it the way you would talk about it. So, you're the most major influence in their life. It helps to know. Let them ask questions even when you don't know the answer, and admit it. I don't know the answer to that one. Why don't we look it up and find out? Or you look it up and find out. I'll get back to you. Let me see if I can find out what that's about. Teach them self-soothing habits, which means you've got to learn them first. You can teach it to them and let them do it by themselves. I have clients who will invite a child or a young adult to come and do a self-soothing habit with them. Sometimes it's mindfulness meditation, sometimes it's deep breathing, sometimes it's a walk, or do it as a whole family. And then there are YouTube videos of just about anything that you can have a question about, they have answers. So if you don't feel comfortable explaining something, find something that does it for you. But do it with them. Because again, you want them to come to you. You want to be the resource when they have questions. The only way you can do that is developing that kind of a relationship with them. Where yes, they do something wrong, let them come to you and say, I did something wrong, and help them through it. So let them, because if they can't come to you, they'll hide it, and then they'll get advice from friends, and that's not the best advice from what I've seen. This one's a hard one. Support groups are very good for helping children not feel like our young adults, or even us, feeling that we're the only one that experienced this, no one else has, and I'm all alone in this, so I don't want to talk about it because people are going to think I'm weird. But support groups can help them with this. The problem with support groups is number one, is it the right support group for your child or your young adult? Number two is finding a support group. So you might have to do some search on Psychology Today has a lot of therapists on there. Those who see children might know that there's any support groups, especially if it's something big, like if a friend has committed suicide. That's hard for a kid if they've had to experience that. And many of them will get very severely depressed, especially if they were friends with this person and they didn't suspect it. So support groups can help them not feel alone. I suppose there are institutes, but I'm not familiar with, I don't work with institutes, so I'm not familiar with anything like, I don't know, Shepherd Pratt might have something, but support groups can also encourage them to speak up in a group where their peers are speaking. So that's one of the suggestions. This is just a reminder. You already know this. I'm just reminding you. Healing takes time. We all like people to get over whatever struggle they've had, mostly because it makes us uncomfortable. You're still grieving about that loss? It's been a year. Aren't you over that? Can't you just let it go? No, it's not that easy. Some people can. Some people can't. For your child, allow them the time it needs. Now this is tricky because, you know, children are age appropriately manipulated, and they'll use things to manipulate you. That's going to be your judgment, because every child's different. But allow them the time it takes to heal from whatever they're going through. That's why talking to them is so important. And be patient. You know that. You know that better than I do. So for losses, as I mentioned before, it's all kinds of losses. There's the loss of, like a friend, that's a really big loss for a child or a young adult. There's also the loss of a family if the parents get divorced. There's a loss of place, familiarity if you move. There's all kinds of losses. I worked for Stella Mars, and we did only grief and loss for them. And they used ritual as a way to help a person get through a loss, especially a close loss. There's something about ritual, some sort of tradition that you can start that concretizes that loss and brings that person in even though they're gone. So one way is to have a memorial service, not memorial so much as have a memory kind of service. And I brought my candle here. And I don't know if anybody wants to do that, but I used this a lot when I did a lot of grief and loss in the beginning of my profession. Bring pictures of their loved one. And this is sometimes people who had losses that were sometimes 10 or 20 years old and they were still not through it. Because what they know about feelings is that the body holds on to feelings unless you let yourself feel them. So if you're feeling intense pain or maybe anger and you don't want to feel it, so you numb yourself and distract yourself, that feeling stays in your body. So bringing them, I've had them bring in pictures. Recently I just had a young man who lost his son. And he couldn't get through it. He couldn't get beyond it. And so I asked him, his wife of course told him, you need to get therapy. This was a couple years after the son had died in a terrible accident. We did, after he got stabilized and he was doing well, I asked him, bring pictures of your son. And he did. And we did a little ritual. We had him sit there and he showed me pictures and he started talking. Now he was afraid to talk about his son because he thought, if I start talking, I'll start to cry. And if I start to cry, I'll never stop. It was hard. It was very hard for him, but I was there, trying to help him balance, trying to help him. And that's where you as parents can do this if your child has a loss that they're really struggling with. And after that particular session, he started to move forward. He'll never be without the pain, but it was bearable. And they started talking about the son. And the siblings started talking about the son. And they started doing things like on the anniversary, he liked to fly kites. Let's go fly kites in his honor. Or for my sister who lost her son, he loved the color green. So we were green on the anniversary of his death. He died by suicide. This is how we help her. And she wants to hear stories. She said, I'm so afraid you'll forget my son. And so every year we try to think of a story maybe we haven't told, or maybe we told it already. Then we share it with her. Like, we don't forget. This is how you ritualize grief and loss. If it's they moved away and they don't have their friends, well, maybe help them write a letter to a friend, or maybe talk about that school and the time they were there. If it's the family, create new memories. The family has got divorced. Find a way to create new memories so they don't constantly mourn what they used to have. And I would encourage having their input on whatever you're going to do. I think sometimes we forget that kids want to be part of the decision making. I'll tell you, I was 5 years old when my dad got moved to Kansas. We lived in upstate New York. Got moved to Kansas for a job, and they decided to bring us all with them. Well, in upstate New York, we lived on a farm. We had fields and we had woods, and it was wonderful. When we went to Kansas, we lived in the city, and I hated it. We had everything within our fingertips: park, pool, a library, the school, all within walking distance. Well, when my dad's job ended, my mother said to us kids, do you want to move back to New York? Do you want to stay here? And I remember saying, I want to move back. Now, I don't think that was the deciding factor in us moving back, but I never forgot. She made me part of that decision. She cared about how I felt when we had to make a decision. So make them part of the decision of what you want to do for a ceremony. Recently, a client got divorced, and Christmas was coming up. And she was like, oh, I don't know how we're going to do this. So she asked her kids, what do you want to do for Christmas? They said, we want the Christmas dinner, but instead of sitting at a table, can we watch our favorite movie? So that's what they did. And they got through that time a little bit better than they would have if they had done the same thing, only it would be very obvious they were no longer a family. So ritual has a lot of power in helping us keep the loved one with us without keeping us in that deep, deep grief. Any questions so far? Any comments?
I have a question.
Yes.
How important is it to have a good cry? I feel like my son is always bottling up a good cry. Like whenever we talk about things, he tears up, but he never like really cries.
It's very healthy to get that out. Some people fight it. I know I fight it when I'm in front of anybody else. I don't want to cry. One thing, I look really ugly when I cry. But encourage him if he needs a good cry. Don't be afraid to cry. If he can't do it in front of you, he may do it in his room. I think the best you can say for that would be, it's okay to cry, so he knows that it's not a shameful thing. I know somehow in our society, crying is considered weak, when actually it's how we help ourselves grieve.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions, comments, thoughts?
So when somebody, I have one question. So when somebody does that, what's the best way to react to that?
Does what?
As a person, say someone's breaking down in front of you,
Mm-hmm.
me sitting there with that person, what's the best thing for me to do while that person?
Depends on the person. When it happens in my office, I usually don't say anything. I just let them cry. If they say, I don't want to cry, then I'll say, it's actually good for you. So I think it depends on the person and how comfortable they are with you.
Sometimes my therapist just lets me cry and just gives me tissues.
Uh-huh.
Just gives me the tissues and she just lets me cry.
That's
And
very good.
She just lets, just doesn't say anything until I'm ready to stop crying. So,
These are the uncomfortable feelings we need to go through in order to get to the other side. There was a saying at Silmar's, they had it on a sheet of paper, that you can't, the only way through grief, and the only way to get to the other side of grief is through it. So you have to experience, and you all know the different stages of grief, they're not linear, but you'll experience most of these, and your young adult or child will experience this too. It's the anger, numbness, bargaining. Bargaining comes in many forms of, I should have done this, I should have done that, and maybe they wouldn't have died. Hurt, and finally, acceptance. Getting through grief doesn't mean you won't feel it anymore. It just means you can manage. And this is especially for mothers who lose children, or parents who lose children. They never get over it. But they learn to live with it, without it taking them down the rabbit hole. Any other comments? Or? Yes?
How do you find a trauma therapist versus just
I would suggest going on Psychology Today or typing into Google trauma therapist. They are around. They tend to be full. I'm completely full at all times. It's really hard. So, because I take insurance. But look on Psychology Today. If you want to use your insurance, put your insurance in and put the trauma that, the type of trauma therapy you're looking for. There's not just EMDR, there's somatic training, somatic trauma training. I think there's some CBT trauma informed. I don't know about them because I don't do that. But look for someone who treats trauma. I would suggest, I do EMDR. It's a very effective modality. Not everybody is helped by EMDR, but I would say 90% of my clients are helped by EMDR. So you can even put that in EMDR therapist. Anyone else? All right.
sorry, I have one more. How does EMDR work?
EMDR is an 8-phase modality. EMDR uses eye movement to help you process. There are two schools of thought, and they fight a lot about this. One school of thought is EMDR, the eye movement is a bilateral stimulation. It somehow keeps your brain connected because whatever traumatized you got stuck in your limbic system, and it's helping you process that, so it goes to the cognitive part of your brain, process, triggers go away, and that's the truth, triggers go away. The other school is that it's a dual awareness stimulation, that while you're watching, well, I use paddles, but there's also, when I do online, I use the eye movement, that it keeps one foot in the present while the other foot goes into the past. And that way you don't disassociate, you don't go back to that completely, which is what happens when you get triggered. You go back to that past and relive the event, which means you're being traumatized. It keeps you in the present while you're doing that, so that that memory can get processed and go into the cognitive part of your brain where it's no longer triggering you. So,
Thank you.
the 8 phases are, the first phase is just history taking, so that's done the very first time you arrive, and then the second stage is learning self-soothing skills, and then setting up for the eye movement, and so on. So, it's not a fast therapy, but, well, it's fast therapy if your trauma is a single incident, like the young man with the car accident. 5 sessions, he was back on his feet, he was gone. Childhood trauma or complex trauma or CPTSD, it takes longer. It developed over years, it doesn't go away in 5 sessions. So it's a little bit different. And we kind of already talked about this, so I would just reiterate, show them how you cope, talk about your own struggles. It's not going to make them love you any less or less respect you. They'll see that this is what it's like to be human. Talk about your feelings, even the ones that you don't like. And then become comfortable with silence. So when they don't want to talk, don't try to force them. Something's going on. Give them time. That's where the play therapy can be helpful and handy. These are just things of my own perception dealing with clients over the years. And this is from adults who had childhood trauma. When things happen at home, like an upset or a fight or anger or something, my strongest suggestion is, after it's over, don't pretend it never happened. Kids know. And they get scared. And they don't feel safe. If something happens at home and it's we all do it. We all have upsets and we all have our own struggles, right? Talk to the kid about it. No, we got a little upset there, but we're fine. I just want you to know we're fine and we're working things out. They have to learn how to deal with conflict. They won't learn if you don't deal with conflict. Have family discussions when the parties are over. That's what I mean by when you're calm, don't pretend it didn't happen. Talk about it. And then invite them to tell you how they felt. This will help them identify their own fear and feelings and give them a chance to express them. And it makes you safe. So many of my clients, they have childhood trauma, will say, I didn't feel safe in my house. I would hear my parents fighting, and I would be up in my room, and I would be scared. And no one talked about it. So yeah, fights happen. Upsets happen. Don't pretend it doesn't, because that makes them feel like they can't trust you. Now, this is just to wind up. I wanted to go over some of the stages of development. Those of you who do childhood education will already be aware of this. But many things that our kids do are age appropriate. We forget. Kids are not, this is what Gottman says, it's not my opinion. It's Gottman says, kids are not young adults. You can't sit down with them and explain to them and have them understand, because their brains are not fully formed. The cognitive part of their brains, where we make our decisions and where we have our understanding, it's not fully formed until they're 24 or 26. So don't expect a 5-year-old to understand your rationale, because he won't, right? So, we're just going to run through this rather quickly, so we don't run out of time. I'm using Erickson's stages of development. There's several, but I like his the best, so if I could make the choice, that's the one we're going to go through. In 0 to 1 year, children are in the development of learning trust. So, as we know, this little one over here is learning to trust. And the way they learn to trust is when the caregiver is reliable, consistent, and nurturing. If you had a parent who was not reliable, trusting, or nurturing, you will struggle with trust. That's just the way it is. So that's the stage from 0 to a year. From 1 to 3, they're going through learning autonomy versus shame or doubt. And this is the time that they need encouragement. They need to be supported to increase their independence. That's where they're going to try to make decisions, and you can be there to encourage them rather than discourage them, because you want them to be independent. You don't want them to be always second-guessing themselves. And I have clients who didn't have that encouragement, and I tell you, they cannot make a decision. They are so stuck. And we do pros and cons, and we do the benefits, and the person will make a decision, and they'll be right back the next week, like, I couldn't go forward with that. I just thought, what if something else happens? So they need that autonomy. They need to be encouraged to be independent. I know that 1 to 3 years, they don't know what they're doing, but unless it's extraordinary, they can't give her too much, so. 7 to 11 years. Industry versus inferiority. This is when they can start planning their activities and accomplish tasks and face challenges. This is where they start asserting control over their environment, which means they make the choice of what toy to play with, what friend to have. They begin to think for themselves. It won't be like you would think for yourself, but it's beginning. They can even formulate plans and execute them, which helps them really build their self-confidence. Lack of that, if you are anxious yourself and you're so afraid your child could get hurt, and I see this a lot in my parents, that you want to make all the decisions, and you want to make sure they don't ever do anything wrong, and you want to make sure they never get hurt, that's harming them. They need to be allowed to know that life, you can make a mistake in life, and you can pick up and you can go on. Because if you can never make a mistake, you are frozen in time and place. And those are the saddest clients I have that cannot make a decision for fear it might be wrong, because they couldn't survive it. Well, how many of you have made a wrong decision in your life? Show of hands? You look healthy to me, you're here. How many of you have families? So, yeah. So you can survive. Teach them they can survive too. 12 to 18. This is the hardest year, is it not? You know better than I do. They're trying to learn their identity. They're going to push back. They're going to be rebellious. They're going to ignore you. You're the stupidest person in the world. I can't believe anything you say. You're just stuck in your old ways. But it's age appropriate. Keep reminding yourself that. It's age appropriate. They're trying to figure out who they are. If you remember that, you won't take things so personally. I know it hurts. I know it hurts when your kid says, I hate you, you're the worst mother in the world, or the worst dad in the world. Remind yourself, it's not about me. They're going through this change, and they're trying to figure out who they are. And when they're in this stage, their biggest fear is how everybody else judges them. Not you. They don't care how you judge them. It's their friends, their peers. They need to get through this stage, or they will never form an identity. So even though this is the hardest stage of all, and I've had mothers say, if I knew I had to go through this, I never would have had kids. And I get it. But they'll get through this, hopefully, and come out the other side. And sometimes then they're the best friends. But they need to go through this. And if you haven't gone through this, if your parents didn't allow you to go through this, then you probably struggle with your own identity. Because we need to know who we are, apart from our parents, apart from our families, apart from our friends. So this is a very important developmental stage. I put this in because sometimes kids are home longer these days, going to school, not being able to afford an apartment of their own or a place to stay on their own. So this is where they're learning intimacy versus isolation. I just wanted you to be aware of this. It's where it can be very hard for a young adult because rejection hurts all of us. But it hurts those in the first stages of this, it hurts them more, like it's the end of the world. So be aware, be there for the ear. They're not going to listen to your story of, well, you know, I can tell, I could have prevented that if you listen to me. They're not going to appreciate that. But they will appreciate you saying, want to talk about it? What's going on? Alrighty. Any other questions? Any other comments? You all understood it 100% perfectly? That's so great. Yes.
So you talked a lot about trauma that it seemed to be like a, not that death is singular, but like a moment, or like a move, or what if there is a trauma that lasted years in a childhood?
That's the kind of trauma that I work with. It's called complex trauma. It's if you felt either not nurtured or not safe as a child in your home. You could have had the greatest parents ever, but maybe you were the kind of child that didn't connect with them, or they were the kind of parent that didn't connect with you. You would have felt that. That constitutes trauma. It's over a period of time. It also happens in relationships that are abusive. Sometimes the person you thought was the perfect person for you turns out to be either a narcissist or a sociopath that's gaslighting and eventually erodes away your sense of self. That's also trauma. It doesn't have to be one single event like a rape or a car accident or a terrible storm, or we like to think of soldiers going to war or people on the line of duty dealing with death. That's actually easier to treat than complex trauma. Most people that come to my office in the beginning, now they know I'm a trauma therapist and I only solicit people who know they have the trauma. But most people who come to my office in the beginning didn't know they had trauma. They thought, well, I'm depressed all the time, or I get these panic attacks, I don't know what's going on. The anxiety's killing me, or something to that effect. They have some kind of phobia about something. And when we do the history, find out, well, they had a childhood where the mother didn't want them, and she locked them in the back of the car and let her know that, you know, I never wanted you. Dead. Whole childhood like that. Yeah, that's trauma. Traumatic. You are not dealing with it because that has not left the part of your brain which should be the limbic system. It's there with all the memories of that there. Remember, it doesn't just affect us with triggers. Trauma, this is what our last talk was about. Trauma affects our identity. It affects what we say to ourselves. We can have a person tell us over and over again, you're just so stupid, why don't you get it? And we leave that person and we say it to ourselves. We don't do something right. You're so stupid. We do to ourselves what was done to us, and we don't even recognize it. And that's part of trauma work. Okay, what are those negative messaging going on in your brain? We need to change that. Does that make sense? That kind of a long answer to a short question.
Do you ever feel that medication is part of treatment?
It is, especially if the person can't function. So they can't use any self-soothing skills successfully because their anxiety is so high, or their panic attacks are so frequent, or the depression is so deep. That's when I say, please, find, here's a referral for a prescriber, please see if you can get on something. It's just supposed to take the edge off, and it's not supposed to be long-term. They have side effects for long-term medication. It's just until you get enough healing that you begin. Part of it, healing from trauma is empowerment. Going from the helplessness, I don't know what to do, realizing, oh, I'm getting anxious. Let me do some of my things that work for me to help me bring down that anxiety. So yes, medication has its role. Yes.
What is a good way to, when you have those moments where, you know, a parent has to make a decision for a child that they don't really have input in the decision, how do you explain that to a child? Well, this is what I think is best, but they're not.
How old would the child be?
11.
That's pretty young. Is the decision for their physical welfare or their emotional welfare?
We're moving this summer, and even though we're only moving 10 minutes away, we're trying to let all of them have input on things, but there's just some things that they're not going to have an input in.
I would still have the discussion, see what they feel like, find out what their feelings are, and then explain to them in a way, the best way you can. We have to move here, so we're very aware that this is what you're feeling. We're going to work on that with you, so you don't have to feel alone. I think the worst thing for a child is to have something happen and no one addresses it, and so they feel very alone. You don't want them to feel alone. You want them to know you're there, you're their person. Remember, they need the nurturing. You're their person. Let them know we can talk about it, even if we can't do anything about it. That helps build resiliency. Children are amazingly resilient. Trust them with that, okay? Yes.
A comment on that, because we were military, and 11 was one of the, anyway. He initially decided to start failing his classes because he decided if he failed, he'd have to stay in that school. Sorry. This is Maryland to Illinois, but if it's only 10 minutes away, my suggestion would be, are you staying in the same school? If you're going to a different school, contact the new school and say, we're coming into your school next fall. Can my son come up and meet the gym teacher or meet the secretary or something this year, so he has a face. Because when we moved from Maryland to Illinois, once we figured out the house, we went up in August and we got to meet. We actually got to meet the principal. My first grader got to meet the first grade teacher, and so on. My son, whatever, he was a fifth grade. But it helped because they couldn't pick their teacher.
Right.
But they got to know the teacher before they met the classmates. So that's a long time ago, but I don't know if this was.
Yeah, they're going from public to private school, so we've already been doing shadow days and
Okay,
meetings.
so you're,
For
Yeah.
kids, the biggest part isn't so much the teacher as losing their friends.
Yeah.
So talk to them. The best thing you can do when you can't solve a situation is just let them know, I hear you. I'm here for you. What are your feelings? If you can't help them know their feelings, get a chart. I had a game of feelings, and they had to tell me what feelings they had. And this is a great way to teach them it's okay to have feelings. And then they won't be scared so much. They still won't like it, but they won't be scared so much. So. Yes.
What would you say to a child who is afraid of dying?
That you're afraid too? Everybody's afraid? Did he lose someone that he was close to?
We had just been at a funeral that it was for my grandfather, and my son wasn't incredibly close to him, but I think after that, like everybody was hugging each other at the funeral, so then when we were home and I gave him a hug, it like triggered him, and he started just saying, I'm afraid of dying, I'm afraid of dying.
He'll get over that. How long ago was the funeral?
This was a long time ago.
Okay. Is he still afraid of dying?
We haven't talked about it in a long time. He's 18 now. This happened when he was maybe 11,
Yeah.
but he.
Remember, it's 30 days for a child to get through whatever is traumatic for them. After that, if they're still struggling, then you might want to have a talk or seek professional help.
Okay.
My cousin died when he was 9, so I would have been 10, I think. And I remember when we went to the funeral, it was shocking for me because there he was in the coffin, and death was just sort of an abstract thing. But I could get over it. After a while, it was like, okay, so he's gone. He was a bit of a pest, so as a 10-year-old, it was like, yeah. As a 10-year-old, it's like, oh, I don't have to worry about my aunt yelling at me because we let him tag along all the time. So kids find a way. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate you all coming. I hope this has been helpful so that you can be the parent you are without children here.